A major initiative of Governor Pritzker is now law in the state of Illinois. Today, he signed the Birth Equity Initiative into law that aims to improve access to pre- and postnatal health care.
Illinois Capitol Bureau Chief Max Cotton explains how it will impact mothers.
The Illinois Department of Public Health estimates black women are 3 times as likely to suffer from a pregnancy-related medical condition compared to white women. It's why Governor Pritzker and Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton worked with state lawmakers to target barriers to pre- and postnatal care.
The Birth Equity Initiative is Illinois' way of strengthening protection for the full spectrum of reproductive care. It bolsters our administration's belief that no government should decide when or if a family grows, and ensures that when families do expand, both mom and baby have access to the care they need.
The new law requires private insurance companies to cover pregnancy, postpartum, and newborn care provided by perinatal doulas or licensed certified professional midwives. This includes home births, home visits, and support during labor. Insurers are also required to cover home visits by board-certified lactation consultants, including the cost of recommended breast pumps, breastfeeding supplies, and feeding aids.
With the enactment of this new law today, we bring ourselves closer to a state where every mother, no matter her race, economic status, or zip code, is afforded the right to a safe and healthy pregnancy.
The legislation passed through both the House and Senate along party lines, with all Republicans opposing. They cited its mandate that insurers cover abortions without a copay as a primary reason for their opposition. Despite GOP opposition, supporters argue the legislation will save lives, as CDC data shows more than 80% of pregnancy-related deaths in the U.S. are preventable.
Every woman, regardless of race or zip code, deserves to bring life into this world safely and with dignity. And whether you're on the south side of Chicago or downstate in Cahokia Heights, no family should welcome a new soul with grief for the one who carried it.
In Springfield, Max Cotton, WGEM News.